there's one point that I wanted to mention to you that comes from last week, and it's come up in previous lectures. So it talks there about the children of Aaron, and it talks about disqualifying qualities in their body. If they have certain type of blemishes, deformities, that they'll be disqualified from doing the temple service, although despite that, they can still eat of the meat of the offerings, but they can't, at least in some of the offerings. Let's see. I don't want to state something that's incorrect. But in any event, this isn't really the main point I wanted to. That's just background. The last week reading went on to discuss animals that can't be brought on the altar, and there's actually a distinction between offerings in the temple. If a Ben Noah brings an offering to the temple, what disqualifies it? And if a Ben Noach, if one of the nations brings an offering outside of the temple, so different rules, right? If they bring an offering to be sacrificed in the temple, it's got to follow temple rules, and it can't have any blemishes. For example, whether it's there's something over its eye, or has a broken bone, or it has different kinds of boils on its body. Also mentions there, if the hoof, there's something wrong with its hoof, and it appears it doesn't appear clothed together, or the opposite, something wrong with the hoof. And then it also talks about different having to do with the testicles of the animal. It's crushed or cut up, that can't be brought as an offering to sacrifice. And then if the verse finishes off, and now it's in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 24. It's talking about the testicles of an ox or a lamb or other, or goat, male goat. If it's crushed or cut up in some way, if it's disconnected from the sinews that are connected to the rest of the body, this we shouldn't bring as an offering. Again, besides, those are the last examples given of animals shouldn't be brought as an offering. And then it finishes off, and in your land you shouldn't do this. So our sages tell us that the meaning of this is quite interesting. The meaning of in our land you shouldn't do this is not what it appears to mean. It sounds like any place in your land you should not do this. Do what? You shouldn't. What is the word in English? It slips my mind now, but you shouldn't cause your animal to be unable to have children. In other words, you shouldn't harm the genitalia of the animal, particularly a male animal we're talking about here, anywhere in your land. That's what you would think it's saying. But the sages say no, it doesn't mean anywhere in your land. It means anywhere in the world, any place. So in other words, the word in your land is just coming to tell you not just regarding temple service, but in any place. And they say the reason is because this prohibition not to castrate an animal is a prohibition that's related to the body of the person and the body of the animal. Person shouldn't do that act to an animal. It has nothing to do with the land. In other words, laws that have to do with working the land and produce of the land, of the earth, those are the only types of laws that relate strictly to the land of Israel. It has to be connected to the land. But here it's talking about the animals. So the rule is that laws that apply to human action and don't relate to agriculture, they're not limited to the land of Israel. So because of this rule, they couldn't learn the word in your land literally. They knew it couldn't be literal. And the meaning is any place. And they explain the reason is in your land, it means any animal in your land, not just the temple animals, not just animals being brought in temple, any animals. Everybody hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I was afraid. I think I'm slowing down. I think this computer is slow because my picture and I'm seeing is not keeping up with, seems to be slow. I'm talking and I don't see my video moving. Okay, as long as you can hear me, that's the main thing. All right. So interestingly enough, now the words of the next verse begin at the hands of a stranger, of the son of a stranger. You should not take them to bring them as an offering to God, which is just what I told you earlier. That in other words, it means that if a non-Jew, a foreigner, comes to bring an offering, he also has to follow these rules. However, our sages understood another rule from the placement of verse 25 after verse 24. And they say that the same way a Jew is not permitted to castrate an animal, he can't castrate an animal through making a non-Jew his messenger to castrate the animal. That's also not allowed to do. So in other words, if a Jew has an animal, let's say a pet, they can't just bring it to a non-Jewish vet and have the non-Jewish vet castrate. That's going to be a problem. So the only way out of it is that the Jew would have to sell his animal to a non-Jew, it no longer be their animal, and then they may be able to then neuter their animal and so on. There's also another aspect of this, and that is that there are opinions that the form of neutering we have today, where the animal is not really castrated, they don't lose that organ, the sexual organs are not removed. They're injected with some type of injection that kills the hormones in the testicles or something like that. I don't know all the details, but so the animal remains with its sexual organs visible, and therefore that might be different. It might be different because don't forget, we're talking about the verse is saying here that you shouldn't mutilate the animal in this fashion. So if you're not mutilating it, it may not be about this prohibition, maybe not so much about the removing the ability to reproduce, as is about the mutilation of the sexual organ itself. That's something that is humiliating and distressful to the animal that we're not allowed to do. However, it's interesting that it implies that a non-Jew is allowed to do this. It's only that a Jew shouldn't do it through a non-Jew, but a non-Jew can do this. It's not problematic, which is interesting because you think it might be an offshoot of not eating the limb of a living animal. You may consider it a cruelty to animals to castrate. So there are actually different views. There are some opinions that hold that even a non-Jew shouldn't castrate, but it's not the authoritative opinion. And as I said before, there is a common practice, at least among people who have pets and so on, that they transfer, I guess for that limited time, it's kind of a technical way out of it, but they transfer ownership to non-Jew, who then the non-Jewish veterinarian then neuters the animal. The commentaries also point out another interesting fact, just an explanation a little bit here about this, about what's the special teaching that we're not allowed to accept this from these mutilated and castrated animals from a non-Jew, from a foreigner, to bring as an offering in the temple. So one of the commentaries here trying to find where I saw it. Yeah, so it's in the Saporno, commentary called the Saporno. He comments that castrated animals, we can't, this is something special. It's a special teaching because it was not uncommon, and in fact, as he implies, or actually maybe says expressly, that castrated animals may be at times even more pleasing than animals that are not, for whatever reason. Maybe because they are, the hormones don't, they looked, in other words, they may looked, the non-Jewish animal owner may castrate or neuter, or in order, let's say, to get a more pleasing appearance. For example, I mean, again, I'm familiar with cats from my little just personal experience, but I think the male cat, when it's fertile, has a wider head. So it's possible that animals may have different appearances when they have these different hormones than if these hormones don't operate. And so let's say the non-Jew castrates and so on in order that the animal should have a better appearance or should be stronger because it's not engaging with reproduction with other animals, and so it's stronger. Whatever the reason, but the point is that the nations are doing this to their own benefit, to benefit the animal, in some type of purpose of improving the use of the animal, that it's being castrated. So that's why this is a special teaching, because you'd think this is considered an improvement for the animal. This is beautifying it, and therefore it's not an insult to God to bring it. And so maybe we should accept it. And so it teaches us that the idea of something that's castrated and unable to reproduce, that itself is intrinsically something God doesn't like. Even though among the nations it's completely acceptable, maybe even preferable, but that's something that God does not like and doesn't want to be in the temple. I think there's an interesting allusion from all this, I think, that we can clearly glean. And that is, Kabbalistically speaking, the very idea of Torah and the commandments to Israel is in order to reproduce, so to speak, increase the divine life force in the world, to increase the divine blessing in the world. So it's inappropriate to bring an animal in which an act was done to it as a symbol of barrenness, and to bring that into the temple as an offering to God, where God represents the idea of blessing and procreation. In fact, you could say that reproduction, the ability to reproduce, is a form of God's infinity in his finite creation, right? We ourselves, we have a limited amount of years we'll be here. But through our ability to reproduce, we continue, the species continues. Our own children, our offspring, it continues, they have offspring, and it continues, and so on and so forth. And so that's an element of infinity, of eternity within the physical. And so it's a particularly divine aspect of being human, and really within the creation all over, the ability to reproduce. So that's why particularly this characteristic is inappropriate, it's repugnant when it's sterilized, so to speak, literally, when it's obstructed and removed. It's a sign of something that's the opposite of divinity, so it doesn't have a place in the temple. So then the question is, why can a non-Jew potentially bring that outside of the temple? I'm not so sure they can. I mean, the distinction may go actually only on the other forms. Yeah. So the rule is that a non-Jew is allowed to bring an animal with a blemish on their own altars unless it's missing an organ. So in other words, a missing hand, missing finger, maybe a missing eye. But that would bring up the point that if an animal is castrated and the testicles are removed, even a non-Jew would not allowed to bring that as an offering on an altar outside the temple area because it's missing an organ. Again, however, if let's say it was injected with something, the organ remains present but not operating properly, that would not disqualify it for non-Jews. But if it's fully castrated in the way that was once done, and where the testicles, I guess, are removed or something to that effect, then I think that would disqualify it. So what appears here, even for non-Jew. Okay. So the question is, why would castration be permitted for non-Jews? What's the distinction? Just conceptually. If it's something contrary to what God wants in the world, for example, in other words, God wants his species to continue, right? So it seems like it's kind of it's an interference in God's will, taking away the animal's ability to reproduce. So you'd think that it would be something that's God wouldn't want anyone to do. So it seems that I think the distinction it has to do with the distinction between the divine service of a Jew and the divine service of a non-Jew. In many ways, for example, like the Sabbath, we see that the divine service of an Israelite, the people of Israel, is often mimics and parallels God. For example, the Sabbath, right? Says that I rested. God rested on the seventh day. You should also rest. So you could think that's counterintuitive. I mean, we're not God, so why should we do what God's doing? But we're God's emissaries here, and we are like his direct agents. So we have to act in a godly fashion. And it's almost like we mimic God's behavior here on earth. Obviously, God himself is active here, but the point is we're doing acts to bring out God's behavior and how he interacts with the world. A lot of the commandments, symbolize those different things. For example, the four species, could be seen to relate to different seasons. As it says, so that you're supposed to face all the different winds. So it seems to imply kind of like God's dominion over the natural world on each side, over weather, things like that. So, but the point is that the same way with the Sabbath. We may see later if we talk about the sabbatical year, that's also a point of a Sabbath, right? Resting. But the idea is that God rests. God takes some time to create a distance between himself and his world. And the Jews also, children of Israel also, there's a day of lack of involvement, of a day of kind of being exalted above. Returning to the one's root and kind of an exaltation. So there's one day of lack of interaction with the physical. So because of that, it's kind of parallel, or for lack of a better word, mimicking God's actions. It's not appropriate for a Jew to castrate an animal or cause it to be unable to reproduce. On the other hand, a non-Jew, if it's in some way is in reality a betterment for human society, and that can happen, certain animals may be needed in different ways, and just in terms of efficiency, it may be something that may be needed from time to time for various reasons, as we know. I mean, there's a reason why non-Jewish nations did it at that time, and there are times when this is needed, or whether it's maybe an overpopulation of a certain type of animal. So the nations are supposed to be interacting with the physical on its own terms and doing what's naturally needed in order that the world should function properly. And sometimes that means, balancing things up a little bit when they're out of balance. And that could be in a case like this. I know I saw in the news, it's got to be years ago now, but that Jerusalem had an issue with overabundance of stray cats. And they were wanting to try to, I guess, catch them and neuter them in some way. And there was this issue of how that could halachically be done. But the point is that sometimes in the practical world we live in, this is something that may be a necessity. So the Torah didn't want to forbid that to non-Jews. Any questions on this so far? Or comments? So this leads us into our next subject. Next subject I wanted to talk about is the sabbatical, the Shemitah. And I guess as we're at it, we'll also talk about the Sabbath once a week, just to a certain extent. What's the relationship between these two Sabbaths? And what are the lessons of the the sabbatical year? So there are those who, rationalists who say that it's some kind of a benefit. You have to leave the earth, fallow, I think it's called, every few years. So they're doing that, they're leaving the ground fallow. But in reality, this isn't the case. I think that the majority of opinions is this is not the point of the sabbatical year. And also, in terms of agricultural advantage, if you want to leave fields fallow, then what you really want to do is, what's the word to say? You want to alternate between fields. You don't want to have a year where everything is barren. But you will alternate. Some fields will left fallow while you plant and sow and so on, when you work other fields. But to have everything at the same time, if the point is efficiency and improvement of crops, it's counterproductive. Because you have one year where everything is untouched and you have things growing wild. In fact, under Jewish law, you can't even weed it out. You can't do anything. And so the fields are getting wild and overrun. You have, so this isn't, I think there are some serious problems with looking at it as some type of a human benefit law. Of course, just in general, I don't think the Torah is not a law made for us, even though there may be some secondary benefits, meaning to say it may be for a spiritual benefit, but it's not made as a book of medicine or a book of agriculture to tell, as some more, sociological thinkers may want to say, or some secular Jewish thinkers may want to say, argue that, for example, that the leper was isolated because of it was a disease that was very contagious or something. I mean, we don't need the Torah to tell us things that are common sense, and also that might change with the time. Different things need. There's no requirement. There'd be no need for a divine commandment to tell us how to deal with a leper. You deal with them as practical and as the medical doctors prescribe. I mean, that's not something that needs to be in the Torah. And similarly over here, if a field functions better if it's left fallow, the Torah doesn't have to tell this to us. We don't need a prophecy to Moses that God tells us a prophecy that you should do this. It's not necessary. Those who are experts in the fields of a particular land, a particular climate, they'll tell you how to be a good farmer. This isn't something that has to come from heaven to tell us how to farm. But again, just in general, also the kind of apologists need to say, oh, this is a law that's rational because it benefits us. First of all, the Torah's laws are about morality and divinity. They're not about self-benefit, not about human material benefit. So I would never assume a need to prove that any law has any type of, material benefit in the first place. Same thing about the Sabbath. If there is some advantage to resting one day a week that's emotionally or physically advantageous, that's secondary to the main purpose of the Sabbath. It's not, we don't need God to tell us you should rest one day. If you're tired, you do what you need to do. There's no need for God to make a rule and tell the Jewish people, you need to rest this one day a week. And there's certainly no need to punish people with severe capital punishment for violating the Sabbath because they're supposed to take a rest. That doesn't make any sense. So no, it has to do, as the Torah itself says, it's the covenant and bond between God and the children of Israel, the Jewish people. That's what the Sabbath, the week, is about. It's about a testimony that God created the world. In that way, the seventh year sabbatical is also that way. It's a testament that it's God's world. And once every 7 years, we refrain from exploiting that world. We take a step back from it. And that's something that the Jewish people are supposed to exercise and show and I guess teach. But again, is this something that B'nai Noach, that non-Jews should have to do? No, because their job is again to operate within the world and improve it. And if it's better to be working and to produce produce and to be creative in that fashion to provide food for the world, then they should do so. This is a special. This is something that's kind of, again, bringing a godly, otherworldly, or, heavenly concept into this world. And that's the job of the Jewish people, to bring heaven and earth and to bridge that gap and to bring otherworldly things down here. While the nations should behave in a moral fashion within the structure of this world. And so therefore, there's no requirement. Again, if it's something because of leave a field fallow, that's advantageous, that's a whole different story. Nevertheless, I think there's a tremendous lesson in the sabbatical year that you would think maybe a non-Jew should also implement in some way in his life. And that is this idea of restraint within our own property and saying, even though I have the right to exploit it, to the end, 110%, but I don't, because in reality, this is God's possession, it's not mine. As it says, the earth belongs to me. So in a certain sense, you'd think, again, there's no obligation to do so in any way. And the question is, would it constitute a non-Jew creating their own religion if they in some way would, leave over an area fallow? I mean, I would argue that the better way to do it probably, as opposed to leaving fallow, is to give charity from the land. I understand that the rabbis instituted that when Jews are agricultural workers or owners out of the land of Israel, they also have to set apart a part of their field to give to the poor. That's not biblical. Biblically, it only applies to the land of Israel, but rabbinically, they instituted it even outside the land of Israel. That these laws, I guess, shouldn't be forgotten and other reasons. But I think that's a wonderful way, possibly a non-Jew could apply the idea that this belongs to God by making sure to set aside a portion, not for themselves, but for the poor, in times in the temple, maybe even setting aside part of it to send to the temple treasury, which the non-Jew is permitted to contribute to. That might also be an idea. But the point is to say that, this comes to me from God. It really belongs to Him, and therefore I'm giving Him back a portion which is His to those that are under His charge, which are the orphans and widows, and so on and so forth, and act as God's messenger in this world to take care of those people that are of God's great special concern. By the way, this reminds me of something that I'm getting a little off topic, but it's actually quite interesting and profound. So you'll excuse me. But I believe it was a couple of weeks ago in the reading of Kedoshim, in which it says that you're not allowed to cause pain to a widow and an orphan. And it says if you do cause them pain, then God is going to hear their cries and punish you very severely. Very, very severe. It says if you oppress them, I'll make your children orphans and your wives widows. So I think we learn a profound thing there, morally. A moral point there. And that is like, even though we're starting off with compassion, God is standing up for the widows and the orphan, and that's compassion and mercy, right? And kindness. But immediately there's a shift in gear. And it's really interesting because the verse ends there. Why am I going to do this? I'm doing this because I'm merciful. In other words, that God's saying He's merciful to the orphans and so on and so forth. He acts as their guardian. So, but we see that, again, there's a certain idea that a kind person is outraged by cruelty. He's outraged by a wrong and he responds with outrage because that's what God does. I'm saying what God is saying is that I won't stand for this. I'm going to respond with severely. You can almost say with cruelty, right? I'm going to respond with harsh judgment. So you could say, what happened over here? I thought God is kind, He's the father of orphans. And you see immediately that, well, I mean, I see it as a rebuke to the approach today of we're going to be just super kind to everyone. And even those who are cruel, we're going to be kind to them. And we're not going to stand up. We're not going to, punish them when they've, been cruel to innocents. We're going to forgive them also. I mean, the truth is we have no right to forgive them. It wasn't done to us. If it's done to us, we can forgive. But what's done to others, we have no right to forgive. They forgive, that's different. And it's so easy to forgive when we're not personally hurt. It's kind of like a virtuously cloaked indifference. Is really what it is. No, I don't want to hurt you. Why should I hurt you because you hurt him? It's more like I don't really want to get involved. Being cloaked in like a virtuous, attitude. Yeah, we see that when it comes to wrong action, cruelty, that in those cases we can't be kind. Okay, and that was a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it's an important, very important point because first of all, it's like it shows the important need for discipline and proper weighing and balancing of different, emotions and behaviors. It's not we're always one way. We just love everyone, peace with everyone, everything is fine. No, there is a place sometimes for being severe and even cruel. I mean, it's not our place to act as God and turn the oppressors in the turn their wives into widows. But then again, maybe it is. I don't know. Meaning there may be situations, maybe so. I don't know. Obviously, Amalek was just such a case, right? And we find other cases so many times in the Bible where it seems like the Torah saw that what the children of Israel were doing when they were waging war on the Canaanites, and they executed many kings, that this was the right thing to do. Anyway, obviously, this is a very complex subject, and it's not something that we don't have the right just to play God and take life easily. However, interestingly enough, um, as you well know, Judaism doesn't punish people for different views of monotheism that aren't completely in line with Judaism. There's a lot of tolerance. You don't quite get it. You're basically on the path. You have the basic morality. Even if you mix things up a little bit, your partnership, other gods, or you don't accept. It's okay. We don't go crazy about it. Idolatry, that's another issue. Then you're completely off the charts. You've rejected morality, God, divine morality. So you're off the chart. But we see when it comes to murder, when it comes to oppressing other people, then the response is measure for measure. Then we have to behave harshly. We have to come down on them hard. So that's interesting. I mean, again, I'm just saying this is what God says, that he behaves this way. So I think it is a bit of a message that, for example, the courts, if they see, innocents or the weak being oppressed, that they have to intervene aggressively and punish those parties who are doing that, and not feel, as I think I've spoken about another time, not say, well, there are already some Jews who have emotional problems. Why should we cause emotional problems to others? In other words, there's already been violence. There's been too much. This person is abused, but if we abuse him, it's just cycle of abuse. We don't say that. That's not the Jewish approach. We don't say he did it, but if we do it to him, then we're doing more. We don't view things that way. In other words, we make a judgment call. It has to do whether cruelty, or I should say, or aggression or violence is a better word, maybe, is not taboo in itself. It has to do whether it's wrongful violence or just violence. It's a question of what is it? What's the justification for it? Okay. Anyway, I got off topic. So we were talking about, So we're talking about the Sabbath, and we're talking about the important messages that I think Noah can learn from the sabbatical year. And that's, first of all, that their exploitation of their possessions and of the earth should be limited. And they should learn the lesson, though, that the earth belongs to the King of Kings, and take that lesson appropriately. You could say that they should learn the lesson from the fact that the Jewish people have to have a sabbatical year, and that even though they need to, make sure that the world is working and that there's enough produce for everyone, and that the natural world is functioning continuously, as the blessing was to Noah. What was the blessing? That the world, all the phenomena of the world will continue all the time. The seasons and the constellations and everything will continue going. And so in that vein, Noah's children continue as part of that blessing that God promised. That they're, if you think about it, Noah are reflecting their covenant. This was God's covenant. Everything would continue. Even if people sin, things are going to continue. And Noah also have to continue working the land and producing and innovating and improving society. And there shouldn't really be much of a break. Obviously, a human being needs a physical break. And if a break is needed, that's a break, a rest period in order to take the next step. So, okay. So I suggested that maybe, setting aside a portion to charity from a field, from a set amount, like a tenth, even a fifth, if someone could afford that. Not so easy. But to give a tenth, and that makes all the other 9 parts holy, and clearly gives the message that I understand that this really belongs to God, that He gave this to me, and therefore I see it as my mission to help to act as a messenger towards those that are in His care. There's an interesting point about the sabbatical, and that is that there is a question that's asked there. There's a rhetorical question, or I should say that God lets us know. Says that you're going to ask this question, or He said, lest you, let me see if I can find the language. Lest you ask, what am I going to eat from in the 7th year? Right? Then I will command my blessing in the 6th year, so you'll be able to eat in the 7th year. I'm trying to find this verse here. Maybe brought elsewhere because I'm looking for it. Where is it? Oh, so it's actually in this week's reading in chapter 25, verse 21. Starts in verse 20. If you ask, what will we eat in the 7th year? After all, we must not sow nor gather in our produce. So verse 21 says, I will then order my blessing for you in the 6th year. The land will yield produce for the 3 years' use. So the Siddur comments that you see an interesting thing here. There's no promise, there's no guarantee of a miracle. It's not that you're going to just find edible food in the 7th year. It's going to grow for you, or manna will come from heaven. Or you're going to have miraculous food in the 6th year, and it's going to fill your stomach. You won't be hungry in the 7th year. Nothing miraculous happens here. Only thing that happens is you grow more, you have an abundance of growth. So you have a bumper crop, but that's not miraculous. It's not a miracle. Like, in other words, it's not an open miracle, right? So the question, we can learn an interesting point from this. And it's almost like God is actually assuming we're going to ask this question. In other words, He's saying, you're going to be nervous about doing this. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to take a leap of faith, because you're going to wonder, how is this going to work? And you think about it, it's a bit extreme. And actually, over history, for example, when the Jewish people started returning in larger numbers to the land of Israel in the 19th century, this was one of the big issues was whether the sabbatical year should be kept or not. And then there were those who were of the opinion that it couldn't be kept because people would starve. If they would not keep it, if they would keep it, they'd have nothing to eat, and they wouldn't be able to live, and then they'd abandon the settlement, and they'd go back to Europe or wherever they were from. And so there were those who followed, they sold the land to the Arabs or something. They sell the land for that portion of a year or something to that effect, and they would work the land that way. Some people still accept this approach today. But the Hasidic and Haredi rabbis push towards following it in its simple meaning, not making any compromises. And I actually remember reading that, trying to remember the name of the rabbi, but that one of the leading rabbis of the Lithuanian community in the end of the 19th century was very much advocating strongly for keeping the Shemitah no matter what, because our sages tell us that the Jews were exiled because they failed to keep the sabbatical years. And so he said, if we want a merit to come back, we have to make sure to keep this law and not make any exceptions or excuses or loopholes. But it's really hard. Very, very difficult. So what Chassidus tells us is that, no, but this is exactly the point. This is where the blessing comes from. The blessing of the 6th year comes from the faith, the leap of faith that the person will make in the 7th year. Because of that leap of faith, which is beyond what the person would calculate in their own mind. And they don't have an answer. They don't know how it's going to work, but they rely on God. That reliance and that merit of that belief, that faith is what grows and gives rise to the miraculous bumper crop of the 6th year. And in this way, it's very similar to the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, where Jews don't work on one day out of 7. So you ask, well, you're not working one day out of 7. So how are you making enough for the 7th day? Every day you work for that day. What about the 7th day? That means you have to, at the very least, get a double portion on the 6th day to provide also for the 7th day. If not a little bit more, all those days, so that you'll save up and you'll have enough. So that one day you have your store closed, or you're not peddling your wares, or whatever it is, or you're not a day laborer. You somehow make enough money to cover that other day. So the point is that also takes a leap of faith, and it says drawing a line, and you're saying it's self-sacrifice. It's saying, I don't know what's going to be, but I'm just not doing it, and it'll have to work out. And in that merit, person merits to have a bumper crop, a hidden miracle within nature. Okay, any questions about any of these last ideas?